Konnichiwa. Today, we're going to talk about something we've never talked about before, which is the overall global cosmic structure of Japanese. We've touched on it in the past, but I'd never talked before about its totality, and there's a reason I didn't do that, which we'll come to in a minute. What we're going to talk about starts out with something you already know about, which is the stem system. If you've been following my lessons at all, you know that there is no conjugation in Japanese. Verbs just make a small change to the one kana on the end, changing it from kana to one of the four other rows, and then we attach various kinds of helpers, helper nouns, helper verbs, helper adjectives. But what I didn't explain at the time I introduced this is that it goes much further than this. I left you thinking, perhaps, that the te form, as it's called, and adjectives have some kind of a minor conjugation thing happening. That's a bit like European conjugation and the stuff the textbooks teach. This isn't true. I didn't talk about it too much at the time because I think before you've ingested the basics properly, it could be a bit complicated feeling and hard to take in. But now let's look at it properly. As you know, there are two kinds of word in Japanese, and that is active changeable words and static words. Active changeable words consist of the three kinds of word that can make the engine of a sentence, that's to say, verbs, adjectives, static words are nearly all nouns, and they never change at all. They can't change in any way. Now, all the words that can change sound in exactly the same way. We have to know two things about them. The first is that nothing changes in the base form of a word except the last tana. That's the kana in a verb or the I in an adjective. Nothing before that can change. That's as fixed and settled and inert as a noun. It's only that last kana that can ever change, and that can then have things attached to it. The second thing to know is that they all change according to the stem helper system. So although I introduced the te form as if it was a form, a kind of morphing or conjugation of the whole word, it is in fact a stem helper system of its own. In real Japanese grammar, as taught to Japanese natives by Japanese natives, te and te are regarded as helpers, as entities in themselves that attach to the stem of a word. So essentially, verbs have not one stem system, but two stem systems, and that's partly why I didn't introduce it straight away, because that feels a bit overwhelming at first. The second stem system, that's the te stem, you already know. We'll go over it briefly as the utsu group, and that changes the last kana, utsu koru, into a small tsu, and then you can add the ta or the te as the no group. This changes the last kana, opla, into the, and the influence of the softness of those kana and of the itself affects in a euphonic manner the te or the ta, turning them into de or da. Ku and bu turn into I, and we're going to notice in a minute that this relation between I and the ka, ro, kana, kakiku, kekko, is something that continues to play a role in adjectives. We'll look at that in a minute. Tu and gu turn into I, and in the case of gu, that tension on the ku, that soft sound, again has a euphonic effect on the che or ta that follow it, turning them into de or da. And finally, su in the te form does exactly what it does in forming the I stem in the regular stem system. It becomes she. So there we have the second verb stem system, the te stem, and we use this not only for te and ta, but also to add helpers like the conditional tara and tani. So what about adjectives? Adjectives also have their own stem system. Adjectives in fact have four stems. You can form adjective stems by dropping the I, just as we drop the ru in Ichidan verbs, or by changing that I to one of three ka, ro, kana. Ka, ke, or ku. And as we said before, there's a relationship between ka, ro, kana and I. So with the test stem of verbs, the verb ending in ku, aku turns into I. And the same with the tentem version ku. So we have four stems or adjectives swapping the I or turning it into ta, ke, like tu. The ku stem attaches the nai helper adjective, negativizing the adjective, and also if it stands on its own, and as we know stems sometimes can stand on their own, so the I stem of a verb on its own becomes the null, the S stem on its own forms the imperative. The ku stem of an adjective on its own turns the adjective into an adverb, so you can say it. Hayai kuruma, fast car, fine. Hayaku, hashiru, run fast. And ku is also used, of course, to make the te form. We just add te to the end of the zu. The ka stem takes a small rider, which is the small tsi, so it becomes ka, and we use that to attach the past helper ta, so we say ka, ta, rishika, ta, that was delicious. The che stem also takes a rider, which is ne, so we have the stem chere, and to that we attach the helper ba, which is the conditional. And I made a whole set of videos on conditionals like ba and tere, and I'll put a link above and in the information section below. When we drop the I altogether, we can use it for attaching things like the so helper now, which means that something appears to have that quality, and also to attach helper verbs like garo. So to the stem of hoshi, we can attach garo to make hoshigaro, show signs of wanting something, appear to want something. Or to the tray helper, we can drop that I and attach garo, tagaro, show signs of wanting to do something, appear to want to do something. So as you see, adjectives have a stem system of their own to which we attach a variety of helpers, like a smaller version of the ones verbs have. Now, what about the copula? That's the other dynamic element, the other engine. Now, the copula is only one kana to start with, so generally we add something to that. We can add a small tsi to make the stem da, which can then have the ta, past helper added to it to make da, ta. We can add ra, so it can have the volitional helper added to make da ra. And in the third one, the da itself changes, of course. Having only one kana, da is the last kana, and that can become de to make the te form. It's a little bit less regular than the others, but that's really because there is only one copula, so it doesn't have lots of other things in the same group for it to be regular with. So that's the overall structure of Japanese. It has two kinds of words, active and passive words, transforming and inert words. The inert words can't change in any way, but they can attach particles that tell us what we're doing, and fortunately, because they never change at all, there's nothing tricky about nouns. They always attach the same particle to do the same job, regardless of what noun we're talking about. Much simpler than foreign grammatical systems. Active elements, verbs, adjectives, and the copula can only change that last kana, and they always do it according to the stem helper system. When we understand that, the whole thing becomes a great deal easier to conceptualize and go with. If you have any questions or comments, please put them in the comments below, and I will answer as usual. I'd like to thank my Gold Kokeshi patrons, my producer angels, who make these videos possible, and all my patrons and supporters of all my Kokeshis, everybody who lends their support, financial or moral, to this channel. You are the people we depend upon to keep all this going and to carry forward the revolution in understanding Japanese. And I'd like to thank Sue, watching at Kiss Vermont, for attending this lesson. これからもよろしくお願いします。Class dismissed.